Hello everyone, welcome to your Foundations Exercises 2 video building on our first 8 Foundations exercises. So these exercises sort of expand on what we learned in the previous video, and it all started with the imprint and release. So let's go to lying down, and we're going to expand on the imprint and release exercise. Bend into the knees, bring the feet flat, rest your head and shoulders, and take a couple of deep breaths in through the nose and out through the mouth. Now, one of the things that we learn to do in Pilates is retain or sustain the imprint. So I want everyone to inhale to prepare, and then on your next exhale, imprint your lower back and hold your imprint. Now, just going back to the previous video, remember the imprint is the abdominals and core working to approximate the ribs to the pelvis on the front of the body. The lower back is flat, maybe even imprinting into the floor. The arms are soft and the legs are soft. Now remember, if you feel like you could use a little prop underneath your head, you could always put a little prop underneath your head. You shouldn't be lying with any undesirable tension in your neck here. What you'll observe almost immediately is you can definitely no longer breathe into the abdomen. Your breaths have to go somewhere else. Remember, you're breathing into the sides and the back of the rib cage because the abdomen is quite contracted at this stage, maintaining the imprint. And you can hear it in my voice. I'm working to hold on to my imprint right now. So for toe tapping, we just walk the feet together. We lift the heels away from the floor, and we might even walk the feet a little bit further away from the sits bones, the sitting bones. And then on your next exhale, bring the right leg up to tabletop position, so the right knee is over top of the hip at 90 degrees. And then inhale, lower. And then exhale the left leg up, and then inhale, lower. And we just continue reciprocally moving from side to side. And again, the emphasis is on maintaining that imprint. So I'm holding on to my core and my abdominals consciously to keep my lower back flattened. And I'm trying to stay out of my neck and shoulders. And now you can see why it's so important that you don't use your legs to imprint. Your legs are no longer in a position where they can contribute to the imprint. Here, it's all abdominals. Okay, let's do a few more. Exhaling up, inhaling down. 2. Okay, and then final repetition. 1. Inhale, release your feet to the floor, and then you can release your imprint. And typically, I will always exit you out of the retained imprint. So if we are in an exercise where you're sustaining your imprint, at the very, very end, I'll say, and then release your imprint. Okay, great work. Our next exercise is ab preparation, and now this is building on the head nods that we did in the previous videos. So you'll remember we inhaled to take the eyes down the ceiling, and then we exhale to release. So now what we're going to do is we're going to lift the head and shoulders away from the floor, and what we want to do is retain the head nod. So on your next inhale, start your eyes down the ceiling, head nod. And then as you exhale, curl your head and shoulders up away from the floor. Inhale to stay, and then as you exhale, slowly lower back down to the floor. And the last thing you're going to do is release that head nod. So once the head touches down, release the head nod. Inhale, nod your head, exhale, curl the head and shoulders up. So you've just got this little imaginary golf ball between your chin and your chest. Inhale to stay, and then exhale to slowly lower all the way down to the floor. Inhale, nod your head, exhale, lift your head and shoulders up away from the floor. Inhale to stay, and then exhale to slowly lower all the way down to the ground. And we're just going to continue. So we expand on the sort of optimal craniovertebral flexion in the beginner videos. Here, just make sure, everybody, that when you're lifting, you're curling the head and shoulders up. You finish by looking at the knees. This is why we utilize that head nod. And then when you're lowering down to the floor, it's that sequential articulation of the spine. You don't want to get to this position where you're still looking at the ceiling and you haven't initiated that craniovertebral flexion. Okay, let's do 3 more repetitions. You can always bring your hands into basket your head any time the head and shoulders are lifted. You can always have first, second, and third finger in behind your head. Again, we just don't want any undesirable tension in the sides or the back of the neck when we're executing this exercise. And it goes without saying that your head nod acts as your modification for this exercise if for whatever reason you can't lift the head and shoulders up off of the floor. Okay, very, very good. So now our next exercise kind of builds on our imprint and release again. These are hip rolls or bridging. Set your knees and your feet up in line with your sitting bones, maybe your feet just forwards of the knees. And on your next exhale, roll your hips away from the floor. You're going to come up to bridge. Inhale at the top of your bridge, and then exhale to slowly lower all the way back down to the floor. Okay, so it builds on the imprint. Inhale to prepare. As you exhale, first imprint, but then continue to peel the pelvis and lumbar up away from the floor. You come to bridge. And then as you exhale, one vertebra at a time, you're sewing into the ribs. You're passing through your imprint and returning to the neutral position. So we'll just continue on 4 breaths. Exhale to roll up. Inhale to stay, and then exhale to roll down. Make sure that the neck and shoulders and arms are just totally relaxed. Now, some lumbar spines just don't like the hip rolls or bridging at all. If you suffer from spinal stenosis or spondylolisthesis, you might not like this exercise. So this is building on your imprint and release exercise. You can just work through repetition of your imprint and release as a modification for sure. There's also no expectation to how high you get. Okay, so when you roll the hips away from the floor, if you're just rolling up a little bit, that's fine. We are working towards getting up to the top of the shoulder blade. The top of the shoulder blade corresponds with the second thoracic vertebra, which is a couple of inches before your neck. So you never ever take this exercise so high that your neck starts to flatten out. Your neck is going to remain neutral the entire time. And one other thing I should just note is that if you do work with a head prop, so if you do have a little pillow underneath your head, in this exercise, because we're inverted, because the pelvis is higher than your head, you would remove that head prop from underneath your head, okay? Final repetition, everyone. Exhale, roll the hips away from the floor, come to bridge. Make sure you keep those knees pointing straight forwards in the same direction as your toes. And then as you exhale, slowly roll all the way back down to the floor. A lot of information. Great work, everybody. So now the next exercise we're going to do from our seated position. So come on up to seated, and this is called the half roll back. You bend into the knees, you bring the feet flat on the floor. The arms are reaching out in front of you, horizontal, and you come into the C-curve spinal alignment. It's the first time we've talked about the C-curve spinal alignment. Essentially, you bring your spine into the shape of the letter C. It all starts down here. Typically, the head and neck just follow suit. Just think of scooping the pelvis, really sewing up the ribs, compressing the low abdomen, and again, typically you just kind of naturally pick up that little golf ball between your chin and your chest. Now your whole spine is rounded. So it's kind of like an exaggerated imprint. So with your arms out on the horizon, holding onto the C-curved spinal alignment, inhale over top of your thighs, and then as you exhale, hinge back of your thighs. Inhale forwards, and then exhale back. Now, just because the spine is rounded doesn't mean that the shoulders have to be rounded. So maintain that broadness across the collarbones and the shoulders just softened away from the ears. It's a wonderful exercise, not only to sort of start to really explore the C-curve and sort of over-recruitment of the abdominals. It's an excellent exercise to observe your breath. So as you're inhaling forwards here, you expand into the back of the rib cage. You can't really expand into the front of the body. There's no space. And then when you exhale here, you're really sort of honing in on the navel, drawing in the pelvic floor, lifting the ribs, sewing together as the spinal instability is increasing. It really starts to feel like an abdominal exercise. Final repetition. And then exhaling to slowly come all the way back. Inhale, come all the way up to seated. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go to our side lying orientation. So this is our next popular orientation, side lying. Everyone join me here and just roll over onto your side. You want to come into a perfectly straight line. So imagine just occupying the center of your mat. It's like you're laying over top of a balance beam. Okay, now ideally you rest your head on your shoulder. You can see that my neck isn't really in optimal alignment here. I've got a skinny shoulder. So you could put a little prop underneath your head and your shoulder here for sure. It's not always the most comfortable position for the shoulder, so you could always basket your head like so, or you could just have the arm out in front of you and a bigger pillow here underneath your head. So just again, find a position that you're comfortable in. Now the spine tends to sag when you're at side lying orientation because of gravity. So you actually have to consciously think of elongating the top side of the waist and shortening the bottom side of the waist. It might even lift up away from the ground a little bit to find that perfectly straight line. And don't worry, in time this becomes second nature. Okay, for this next exercise, we're going to bring our hand up onto our hip and exhale deeply to prepare. As you inhale, you float your top leg up laterally, and then you exhale to bring the leg back down. This is just hip abduction. Inhaling up, exhaling down. So, you know, to the untrained eye, it looks like an exercise for the outer thighs, and it is. You're strengthening most predominantly that gluteus medius muscle on the posterior lateral outside of the hip, this muscle back here, the medium-sized buttocks. But primarily here, what I want you to focus on is that pelvic, lumbar, and subsequent upper body stability. So it's very reminiscent of the heel slides that we did in the previous video, where you're really focused on dissociating stability of the pelvis from mobility of the hip. Okay, so do a couple more breaths and just focus on this. And I don't need to tell you that, you know, the breathing and that gentle retention of tone in the abdominal wall, or I should say the core, is so important in trying to cultivate this stability. Now, one other important thing to note here is that the hip abduction typically only goes to about 45 degrees. You're not really going to get the leg much higher. If the leg is getting up higher, then you might be into some hip flexion, and we don't really need to sort of do tons and tons of repetition of hip flexion. So again, just make sure that you stay sort of in your straight alignment, square to the side of your mat, and it should be that smaller glute muscle that you're feeling, okay? We better do the other side. So everyone, let's swing it around and we're going to go over to the opposite side. Nice and straight, nice and long, resting your head on your shoulder. Inhale the leg up, exhale the leg down. And if you want to get fancy, you can integrate this choreography where you point the toes on the way up, dorsiflex on the way down. Individuals that have quite tight hip flexors, these muscles on the front of the thigh will almost immediately start to dominate. And what happens is the leg starts to move forwards in space and your pelvis starts to kind of open up to the ceiling. So again, just make sure that you're not doing this. Anytime that we're in side lying orientation, you can always have your hand on the floor for additional stability. It's varying degrees of instability at side lying. I have friends that have been practicing for 20 years and they still have the hand on the floor. So don't be afraid to use your hand on the floor. Okay, excellent. The next exercise we're going to do is for the inner thighs. It's called hip adduction. So what you want to do here is just bring your top leg to that tabletop position where the hip and knee are at 90 degrees and then just place it on the floor. And to be honest with you, if you could prop it up on top of, you know, a pillow or a foam roller, that's actually more optimal so that the pelvis remains in a relatively neutral position. But it's okay on the floor. Don't forget there's that sort of gentle lengthening of the top side of the waist and lifting of the bottom side of the waist. As you continue to look straight forwards, inhale to prepare, and on your next exhale, you're going to lift the bottom leg up away from the floor immediately. Inhaling down, and then exhaling out. For 7, 6, 5. You can add choreography with the ankle here too if you wish. 4, just watch that the spine isn't collapsing. Maintain that nice straight spine. 3, 2, and then final repetition for 1. Slowly bring the leg back down. Let's swing it around. We'll go to the opposite side and we'll do the same exercise on the opposite side. It's really easy to forget about the alignment of the upper body when we're doing these lower body exercises. So hopefully your video screen is set up in a position where you're not sort of deviating from that optimal alignment. If you are, for example, you have to look down to see what's going on. As soon as you know what's going on, get back into that nice alignment from the waist up. So here's your choreography, friends. Exhaling up, inhaling down. 7, 6, 5, remembering that every time you exhale, there's that gentle recruitment of pelvic floor. 3, 2, and then final repetition, team. 1. Very, very good. The final sort of popular orientation in our mat Pilates, and there are a couple of more, but you know, there's really only a few really commonly used ones, is 4-point stance, hands and knees. Join me here at quadruped. It has a lot of names. You know, some people call this hands and knees, or 4-point stance, or quadruped. Hands are underneath the shoulders, knees are underneath the hips, and you try to find that nice straight alignment through the spine and those nice soft shoulders. We're going to work through our cat stretch. We talked about cat stretch very briefly in the previous video as a modification for shell stretch or child's pose. From your neutral alignment, inhale to prepare, and on your next exhale, round your spine. You resonate out from center. You finish by tucking the tail and gently tucking the chin. And then as you inhale, you'll extend the spine. You finish by tilting the pelvis and lifting the gaze. Exhale to round, and then inhale to extend. And to be fair, you can't really do this exercise incorrectly. You know, we talked in your breaststroke preparation number 1 exercise in the previous video about not overextending your neck. You might, you know, spare your neck some undesirable tension. There's no need for you here to look out on the horizon. You might just take your neck out and your gaze out in front of your mat, you know, a few feet. One thing to note and observe is that the shoulder blades should be moving in this exercise. As you inhale here into extension, the shoulder blades gently slide down the back of the rib cage. And as you exhale here into flexion, the shoulder blades slide up the back of the rib cage. Inhaling, the shoulder blades slide down. Exhaling, the shoulder blades slide up. Now come to your neutral spinal alignment with me here, and we'll do what is one of my favorite exercises, arm opposite leg. Inhale to prepare. As you exhale, extend your left arm and your right leg. Inhale, return to 4-point stance. And then as you exhale, send out the other arm and leg, alternate. So this exercise also has a lot of different names. In yoga, it's called bird dog. Essentially, you're dissociating what is spinal stability from shoulder and hip mobility. It's kind of like your heel slides and your shoulder scissors all wrapped up into the same exercise. However, you're not on your back. You're now in a more unstable orientation, sort of hands and knees. So don't worry about so much about touching the ceiling. I would suggest more this idea of elongating out to the ends of the room or out to the ends of the universe while you maintain not only the stability of the spine, but also the neutrality of the spine. Let's do 3 or 4 more. Four-point stance, hands and knees, is sort of an orientation that we work in conservatively. We don't spend too much time there because it is a lot for the wrists. So, you know, the shell stretch could be a great modification for cat stretch if you don't like being at hands and knees. And there's no reason why you couldn't do that arm opposite leg lying on your abdomen in prone position if you don't like being at hands and knees. Friends, this wraps up our foundations level 2 exercises. Again, memorize these exercises. They built on the foundations 1 exercises, and exercises that you see in the future are going to build on them. You will use these exercises as modifications. I will constantly be referencing cat stretch, arm opposite leg, hip abduction, hip adduction as alternatives for more challenging exercises that we're going to see down the stretch. I hope you found this video really informative, and I can't wait to see you now in the beginner repertoire. Have a great day.